everybody. Welcome to technically our first week in fourth quarter. This is screencast 2 of our respiration notes series. Miss Francilli and I are sharing the notes, so some of the sections she will do and some of the sections I will take care of. So the first thing I asked you to do to get you thinking about this part of the respiratory system, I asked you to sing in your lowest voice and to sing in your highest voice. Okay, and the question I wanted you to think about was, how do you produce sound? Where is it coming from? What part of the body is responsible for voice production? And how can you change the tone of your voice from low to high? What's happening? If some of you are vocalists, you might know the answer to these questions, and some of you may have learned it in the past, but I don't want you Googling the answers. As we go through our notes, we're going to get some of these answers, and I'll talk about how each one of them occurs as we go. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with the pharynx. I'm starting where Miss Francilli left off. So we're talking about the pharynx, otherwise commonly known as the throat. Okay, so there's 3 parts of the pharynx. We have the nasopharynx, okay, the oropharynx, this section, and then we have the laryngopharynx down here, okay, just superior to the larynx. Right? And commonly known as the throat is a passageway for food and air, and it also aids in sound production. Okay? It amplifies sound as it's leaving through the oral cavity. The pharynx is actually part of 2 body systems. The respiratory system, air is going to come in through the nasal cavity or the oral cavity and travel down into the trachea. For the digestive system, the pharynx is involved as well. So the food bolus that you eat is going to travel in through the oral cavity, past the uvula, and into the pharynx. And at this point, we're going to talk about this structure a little bit later. The epiglottis is going to divert that food into the esophagus, where that will travel down into the stomach, okay? The epiglottis is going to prevent the food from going into the trachea or the airway. All right, so the special structure that I mentioned is called the epiglottis. So right here is the epiglottis. This is really important, as we don't want food that we're swallowing to end up in the trachea. That's when choking will occur, okay? So it needs to be diverted into the esophagus, which is posterior to the trachea. So what's going to happen with the epiglottis? It's a flap, okay? And it's going to cover the larynx. But what happens when you swallow, and if you put your hand on your throat, you can actually feel this happening if you try swallowing at the same time. The larynx is going to travel upward to make contact with the epiglottis, and that's going to cover it like a lid. So it's going to cover it, it's going to prevent food from entering into the airway. All right, so the next structure involved, we're going to take a look at the larynx, otherwise known as the voice box. So that structure that produces sound from your warm-up is found in the larynx. So here's an anterior view of the larynx. All right. It's superior to the trachea, so it's above the trachea, and it's going to move air in and out of the trachea, and it houses those vocal cords or vocal folds that I'm going to talk about in a second. So first, let's go over some anatomical structures as part of this area. So the hyoid bone, you may have heard of this, okay? It's located in just above the larynx, and it is going to help support the tongue. Oftentimes, this bone can be broken in events like strangulation. They're doing an investigation of a murder. They'll look to see if the hyoid bone has been broken. It can also be injured in sports activities like playing softball. All right, so we're going to talk about three different cartilages that make up the larynx, and we have the thyroid cartilage right here. In males, this is also known as the Adam's apple. Males produce more testosterone, therefore they have more of the cartilage in this area. And females, we don't have such a prominent Adam's apple, okay? It's flat along the throat. We have the cricoid cartilage, okay? And then the trachea, which is made of cartilaginous rings that we'll talk about in a few minutes, all right? And then we have the epiglottic cartilage. So we talked about the epiglottis, that flap that covers the glottis, which is the hole leading down into the trachea. And here's a posterior view. So from the back side, you're able to see what the larynx looks like. All right, so let's check out these vocal folds. So it contains two horizontal folds composed of muscle and connective tissue, okay? We have false vocal cords, all right? So in here you can see the false vocal cords, the upper vestibular folds, and these do not create sound, all right? And then we have the true vocal folds. These are a little bit lower. They are going to produce the vocal sound, and the opening between them is the glottis. Okay, so right here, this is the glottis, and that's what the epiglottis covers to prevent food from traveling down there when we're swallowing. All right, so you can take a look here. Here is a actual image of those vocal folds. All right, and they're stretched across the glottis. So as air is expelled from the lungs, it moves up the trachea and it travels past those vocal folds. As it does that, it creates vibrations and sound waves, okay? So from our warm-up, you can think of a guitar, the strings on a guitar. If the strings are looser and you strum those strings, okay, they're going to create a lower tone or a deeper tone. So the same thing is happening with those vocal folds. The looser they are, the more relaxed they are, the lower the tone is going to be. If they're stretched more tightly, that's going to create a higher pitch or a higher tone as the air passes by those vocal folds. All right, so